The millionaire's wife humiliated the cook in front of everyone, but what she revealed was shocking. Dark secrets came to light, changing lives forever. No one was prepared for what happened next. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more exciting stories like this, and leave a like on the video to keep following us. The morning sunlight streamed through the high windows of Thornfield Manor, illuminating the grand kitchen where Lily Parker stood, meticulously arranging herbs on a wooden cutting board. Her hands moved with practiced precision, but her mind was far from the task at hand. It had taken months of careful planning to secure this position as head cook in Edward Blackwood's magnificent Bath estate. And now that she was here, the weight of her purpose pressed upon her chest like a stone. "Miss Parker, Mr. Blackwood has specifically requested your scones for afternoon tea," announced Mrs. Winters, the stern-faced housekeeper. "Lady Victoria will be hosting several members of the Bath Historical Society, and everything must be impeccable." Lily nodded, her face betraying nothing of the storm that raged within. "Of course, Mrs. Winters. I'll begin preparations immediately." As the housekeeper departed, Lily reached beneath her apron to touch the small, leather-bound notebook tucked securely in her pocket. Her father's legacy. Thomas Parker had been a brilliant accountant with an uncompromising moral compass. His mysterious passing 6 months ago had been ruled an accident, but Lily knew better. Her father had discovered something in the Blackwood Financial Group's records, something worth silencing him for. "You seem distracted today," remarked James, the young kitchen assistant who had taken a liking to Lily since her arrival 2 weeks prior. His kind eyes and gentle demeanor had made him the first friend she'd found in this intimidating household. "Just concentrating," Lily replied with a forced smile. "These scones need to be perfect." "Everything you make is perfect," James said, a hint of admiration coloring his words. "Though I don't understand why you'd leave that prestigious position at the Royal Crescent Hotel for this place. The Blackwoods pay well, but—" Lily carefully measured flour into a large mixing bowl. "Sometimes a change of scenery is what one needs." What she couldn't tell him was that each day spent in this kitchen brought her one step closer to understanding the circumstances of her father's final days. Thomas Parker had been working late at the Blackwood offices when he supposedly lost his footing on a staircase. No witnesses, no explanation for why a meticulous man who abhorred disorder would leave his papers scattered across the floor. The sound of heels clicking against marble interrupted her thoughts. Victoria Blackwood entered the kitchen like a queen surveying her domain. Tall and striking, with honey blonde hair arranged in an elegant updo, she embodied sophisticated glamour. But Lily saw something cold in those calculating blue eyes, something that sent a chill down her spine. "You must be the new cook Edward has been raving about," Victoria said, her cultured voice carrying the slightest hint of disdain. Lily wiped her hands on her apron and offered a respectful nod. "Lady Blackwood, it's a pleasure to meet you properly. My husband claims your coq au vin rivals any he's tasted in Paris," Victoria continued, trailing manicured fingers along the edge of the countertop. "Quite the accomplishment for someone so young." "My father ensured I received proper culinary training, ma'am." Something flickered across Victoria's face, so brief Lily might have imagined it. "And what did your father do?" "He was an accountant," Lily answered, watching carefully for a reaction. "How utterly conventional," Victoria replied with a dismissive wave. "Well, I expect those scones to be extraordinary. We have Oliver Harrington joining us, Edward's business partner and a dear family friend." The name sent a jolt through Lily's body. Oliver Harrington, the man whose signature appeared alongside her father's on numerous suspicious documents detailed in the notebook. The second name in her quest for justice. "Of course, Lady Blackwood. They'll be ready in time." After Victoria departed, Lily returned to her work with renewed determination. The afternoon tea would provide her first opportunity to observe Victoria and Oliver together, to search for clues in their interaction that might confirm her suspicions. Hours later, Lily arranged delicate cucumber sandwiches and freshly baked scones on silver platters. Through the service door, she could hear the murmur of conversation from the sunroom, where Victoria entertained her guests. With practiced efficiency, Lily wheeled the tea trolley into the bright, plant-filled space. Edward Blackwood sat at the center of the gathering, his commanding presence drawing attention even in stillness. Unlike his wife's cold beauty, Edward possessed a warmth that surprised Lily. In his mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and intelligent eyes, he had not been what she expected. The monster in her imagination bore little resemblance to the man who thanked servants by name and donated generously to local charities. "Ah, here's the culinary wizard herself," Edward announced upon seeing Lily. "Mrs. Parker, your additions to our kitchen have been nothing short of revolutionary." Lily felt her cheeks warm under his praise and the attention of the assembled guests. "Thank you, sir. I hope everything is to your liking." She began serving tea, carefully noting Oliver Harrington's position beside Victoria. He was younger than Edward, perhaps 35, with carefully styled dark hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. As Lily placed a cup before him, she noticed Victoria's hand briefly touching his beneath the table, a subtle gesture laden with meaning. "Mrs. Parker," Edward called, "would you explain to our guests your unique approach to these divine scones?" As Lily described her technique, weaving a simple tale of culinary inspiration, she observed the room. Victoria's posture had stiffened at her husband's enthusiastic attention toward the cook. Oliver maintained a facade of polite interest, but his eyes frequently darted to Victoria when he thought no one was looking. The performance might have continued perfectly had Lily not stumbled while serving the final round of tea. Her elbow caught Victoria's arm, sending a cascade of Earl Grey across the woman's immaculate white dress. "You clumsy fool," Victoria hissed, jumping to her feet as the stains spread across the expensive fabric. "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am," Lily apologized, reaching for a napkin. "Don't touch me," Victoria snapped, her composure fracturing momentarily. "Do you have any idea what this dress costs?" Edward rose to his wife's side. "Victoria, it was clearly an accident. An accident that ruined a $3,000 Burberry." Victoria's eyes flashed dangerously. Lily stood frozen, acutely aware of all eyes upon her. This was not part of her plan. Drawing attention to herself so early in her employment could jeopardize everything. Yet some reckless impulse propelled her next words. "Perhaps some secrets are harder to remove than tea stains, Lady Blackwood." A deathly silence fell over the room. Victoria's face drained of color, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly before narrowing in fury. "What did you just say to me?" she whispered. Edward placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. "Victoria, please, our guests—" "I believe I misheard," Oliver interjected smoothly, his charming smile doing little to mask the tension. "Mrs. Parker was offering cleaning advice, surely?" Lily dropped her gaze submissively. "Of course, sir. I only meant that some fabrics retain stains more persistently than others. My apologies for any misunderstanding." But the damage was done. As Lily retreated from the sunroom, she could feel Victoria's ice-cold stare burning into her back. She had made a dangerous enemy and revealed her hand far too soon. Back in the kitchen, Lily leaned against the counter, heart pounding. Had she just sabotaged her only chance to discover the truth about her father? The notebook in her pocket seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds, filled with numbers and codes that hinted at massive financial impropriety within Blackwood's company. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "The truth needs a worthy champion, Lily Flower." She straightened her shoulders and returned to her work. One impulsive mistake wouldn't deter her. Victoria Blackwood may have wealth, power, and influence, but Lily had something far more valuable: the righteous fury of a daughter seeking justice for her father. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Bath's golden stone buildings, mirroring the tempest brewing within Thornfield Manor's elegant walls. Chapter 2. Beneath the Surface. The following morning, Lily awoke before dawn in her small quarters above the garage. Though modest compared to the opulence of the main house, her room possessed a cozy charm, with its slanted ceiling and view of Thornfield Manor's extensive gardens. She dressed quickly, knowing the kitchen awaited her preparations for breakfast. As she crossed the dew-dampened lawn, Lily noticed a light burning in Edward Blackwood's study. Through the tall windows, she could see his silhouette hunched over a desk strewn with papers. He appeared troubled, running his hands repeatedly through his disheveled hair. What kept the master of Thornfield Manor awake at such an hour? The kitchen was blissfully empty when Lily arrived. She cherished these solitary moments before the household stirred to life. Methodically, she prepared fresh bread dough, allowing her mind to wander to the previous day's confrontation. Victoria's reaction to her cryptic comment had been revealing. Not the indignation of an innocent woman, but the momentary panic of someone with secrets to protect. "You're an early riser," came a deep voice from the doorway. Lily startled, nearly dropping the bowl in her hands. Edward Blackwood stood watching her, his usual impeccable appearance rumpled from what appeared to be a sleepless night. "Mr. Blackwood, I didn't hear you come in." Edward smiled tiredly. "The hazard of hiring a cook who's more dedicated than the master of the house, I suppose?" He approached, inhaling the scent of the bread dough appreciatively. "Something troubles you, Mrs. Parker. I noticed it yesterday, even before the unfortunate incident with my wife." Lily's hands stilled. Was she so transparent? "It's nothing, sir. Just adjusting to new surroundings." Edward studied her face with unexpected intensity. "I find that hard to believe from someone who handled Victoria's temper with such pointed grace." Lily busied herself with kneading the dough, uncertain how to respond. "My wife can be difficult," Edward continued, his voice softening. "But she wasn't always this way. Success changes people, sometimes not for the better." "You seem to have managed well enough," Lily observed cautiously. Edward's laugh held little humor. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I've simply become adept at ignoring what I don't wish to see." He glanced at his watch. "I have an early meeting at the office. Would you mind preparing something I can take with me?" "Of course, sir." As Lily assembled a breakfast sandwich, she felt Edward watching her with curious interest. "You remind me of someone," he said finally, "though I can't quite place who." Lily's heart skipped a beat. Had he recognized her connection to Thomas Parker? "I have one of those faces, I suppose." "No," Edward said thoughtfully. "It's something else, a certain determination in your eyes." Before she could respond, Mrs. Winters entered the kitchen, breaking the strange intimacy of the moment. Edward accepted his wrapped breakfast with a nod of thanks and departed, leaving Lily simultaneously relieved and disappointed. Throughout the morning, Lily went about her duties mechanically, her mind racing. Edward's unexpected warmth complicated matters. In her pursuit of justice, she had prepared herself to face monsters, not men with troubled eyes and genuine kindness. By midday, the household was abuzz with preparations for the evening's dinner party. Victoria had invited several prominent Bath families, ostensibly to showcase a collection of artwork newly acquired for the Manor's gallery. Lily suspected the real purpose was to re-establish social dominance after yesterday's embarrassment. "Lady Blackwood requests your presence in the dining room," Mrs. Winters informed Lily with obvious disapproval. "Apparently, she wishes to discuss the menu personally." Wiping her hands on her apron, Lily steeled herself for the confrontation. She found Victoria arranging flowers at the center of an elegantly set table, her movements precise and controlled. You wanted to see me, Lady Blackwood? Victoria didn't look up from her task. Yes, I thought we should clear the air after yesterday's misunderstanding. Lily remained silent, waiting. My husband thinks highly of your culinary skills, Victoria continued, carefully positioning a white rose. It would be a shame to lose such talent over a simple accident. I appreciate your understanding, ma'am. Victoria finally raised her gaze, her blue eyes as cold as winter frost. Let me be perfectly clear, Miss Parker. I don't believe in accidents. Not spilled tea, and certainly not cryptic comments made in front of my husband's business associates. I meant no. Don't insult my intelligence. Victoria's voice remained perfectly modulated, betraying no emotion. You've been here 2 weeks, yet you've managed to ingratiate yourself with the staff, charm my husband, and create quite the little niche for yourself. She stepped closer, the scent of her expensive perfume enveloping Lily. I'm curious about your background. The references you provided were impeccable, almost too perfect. I wonder what I might find if I were to investigate more thoroughly. Lily fought to keep her expression neutral. Her false credentials had been painstakingly constructed, but they would not withstand intense scrutiny. I have nothing to hide, Lady Blackwood. Everyone has something to hide, Victoria replied with a chilling smile. For instance, I wonder why a chef of your supposed caliber would choose domestic service over a restaurant position, or why someone with no connections to Bath would seek employment in this specific household. Before Lily could formulate a response, the dining room door opened. Oliver Harrington entered, his confident stride faltering momentarily when he noticed Lily. Victoria, darling, I didn't realize you had company. His smooth voice betrayed no hint of impropriety, but Lily noted how his hand lingered slightly too long on Victoria's shoulder. Just discussing menu options with our cook, Victoria replied. Oliver, have you met Mrs. Parker? She's quite the culinary prodigy, according to Edward. Oliver extended his hand with practiced charm. I believe we were briefly introduced yesterday. Your scones were exceptional. As Lily accepted his handshake, she felt something press into her palm. A small, folded note. She closed her fingers around it instinctively, confusion flooding her mind. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. If that's all, Lady Blackwood, I should return to the kitchen. Victoria waved her away dismissively. Ensure the Wellington is perfectly medium rare this evening. Lord Pembroke is particularly fastidious about his meat. Back in the kitchen's relative safety, Lily unfolded the note with trembling fingers. The garden shed. 3 p.m. Come alone. What game was Oliver Harrington playing? Was it a trap set by Victoria, or something else entirely? Lily glanced at the clock. Just past 1. She had 2 hours to decide whether to meet the man her father's notebook implicated in financial fraud on a scale that had possibly cost Thomas Parker his life. At precisely 3 o'clock, Lily slipped away from the kitchen, telling James she needed fresh herbs from the garden. The stone pathway led her past immaculately maintained flower beds to a quaint wooden shed, partially obscured by a massive oak tree. Heart pounding, she pushed open the weathered door. Oliver stood by a potting bench, his expensive suit incongruous against the humble surroundings. He turned at her entrance, his expression unreadable. You came. I wasn't certain you would. Lily remained near the door, ready to flee if necessary. What do you want, Mr. Harrington? To warn you. His voice had lost its practiced smoothness. Victoria knows who you are. The blood drained from Lily's face. I don't know what you... Please, he interrupted. We don't have much time. Victoria has connections throughout Bath. Did you think she wouldn't investigate after your little performance yesterday? She knows you're Thomas Parker's daughter. Panic surged through Lily's chest. Are you here to threaten me then? On her behalf? Something like pain flashed across Oliver's features. No. Contrary to what you might believe, I didn't want any harm to come to your father. Thomas was a good man, too good for the likes of us. Then you admit it? Lily demanded, anger replacing fear. You and Victoria were embezzling from Blackwood Financial Group? Oliver glanced nervously toward the door. It's more complicated than that. Victoria has been siphoning funds for years through a network of shell companies. I discovered it accidentally and made the mistake of confronting her. So she blackmailed you into helping her? In a manner of speaking. Oliver's laugh was hollow. Victoria Blackwood doesn't ask for cooperation. She ensures it. When I threatened to tell Edward, she revealed she'd been documenting our affair for months. Pictures, videos, enough to destroy my marriage and my career. Lily struggled to process this information. Why are you telling me this? Because you're in danger, Oliver replied grimly. Victoria eliminates threats permanently. Your father discovered her scheme and tried to gather evidence for Edward. The morning after he told me his plans, he was found at the bottom of those stairs. A chill ran down Lily's spine. Are you saying she killed him? I'm saying nothing happens around Victoria without her orchestration. Oliver checked his watch nervously. You need to leave Thornfield Manor. Today, before dinner. I can't, Lily whispered, her father's notebook a heavy weight in her pocket. Not until I find proof Edward can't ignore. Oliver stepped closer, his expression intense. Then you'll need help. Victoria keeps a private laptop in her personal study. The passwords are in a small red notebook in her desk drawer. If your father's suspicions were correct, everything you need would be there. Why would you betray her? Why now? Because I'm tired of being controlled, Oliver said simply. And because your father once showed me kindness when I didn't deserve it. Before Lily could respond, voices drifted through the open window. Gardeners returning from their break. Oliver pressed something into her hand, a small key. Victoria's study. Use it tonight during dinner when everyone is occupied. His eyes locked with hers. Be careful, Lily Parker. Victoria Blackwood didn't become one of Bath's most powerful women by showing mercy to her enemies. With that, he slipped out the back door of the shed, leaving Lily clutching the key and wrestling with impossible choices. Could she trust the man who had been her father's colleague and Victoria's lover? Or was she walking directly into a carefully laid trap? Through the shed window, she could see Thornfield Manor rising majestically against the afternoon sky, its elegant facade concealing dark secrets within. Somewhere in that house was the truth she sought, and a woman who would do anything to keep it hidden. The Blackwood dining room hummed with conversation as Bath's elite savored the four-course meal Lily had spent the day preparing. From her vantage point near the service entrance, she observed the gathering with tense anticipation. Victoria presided at one end of the table, resplendent in emerald silk, while Edward commanded the opposite end, engaging Lord Pembroke in animated discussion about recent developments in financial regulations. Shouldn't you be supervising the dessert plating? Mrs. Winters appeared beside Lily, her perpetually disapproving expression deepened by suspicion. Just ensuring everything is proceeding smoothly, Lily replied, stepping back from the doorway. The soufflés need perfect timing. As she retreated to the kitchen, Lily's hand closed around the key in her pocket. Oliver's warning echoed in her mind. Victoria knew her true identity. Every moment spent in Thornfield Manor increased her danger, yet she couldn't leave without the evidence needed to vindicate her father. The dinner would continue for at least another hour. If Victoria truly suspected her, this might be Lily's only opportunity to access the private study before her position became untenable. James, she addressed the kitchen assistant, can you oversee the dessert service? I have a sudden migraine and need to lie down for a few minutes. The young man nodded earnestly. Of course. Should I inform Mrs. Winters? No need to trouble her, Lily replied, removing her apron. I'll be back before the dessert plates need clearing." Heart pounding, Lily took the servants' staircase to the manor's east wing, where the family's private rooms were located. The corridor stretched before her, dimly lit and silent. She moved swiftly, counting doors until she reached the one Oliver had described. An unassuming oak panel with a subtle rose carving on its frame. The key slid into the lock with unsettling ease. Inside, Victoria's private study reflected its owner's taste for understated luxury. Cream walls adorned with original watercolors, a delicate writing desk positioned to capture the garden view, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. Lily closed the door behind her and stood motionless, listening for any sound that might indicate discovery. Hearing nothing but her own shallow breathing, she moved toward the desk and began her search. The top drawer contained stationery and correspondence, nothing of interest. The second held various receipts and household records, meticulously organized. In the third drawer, Lily's fingers brushed against something small and bound in red leather, the notebook Oliver had mentioned. With trembling hands, she opened it to find a list of passwords, each labeled with cryptic abbreviations that meant nothing to her. She located Victoria's laptop in a concealed compartment beneath the desk and powered it on, praying the passwords were current. After 2 failed attempts, the screen unlocked, revealing a desktop arranged with the same fastidious care as Victoria's physical space. Lily navigated to the email application, scanning for anything related to Blackwood Financial Group. Most messages were mundane: charity committee correspondence, social invitations, arrangements with interior designers. A folder labeled BGH Consultancy caught her attention. Inside were dozens of emails between Victoria and various offshore accounts, many referencing special project allocations and discretionary transfers. The language was deliberately obscure, but the attached spreadsheets told a clearer story. Millions of pounds diverted from Blackwood's legitimate operations into a complex network of shell companies. Lily's hand flew to her mouth as she realized the scale of Victoria's theft. This wasn't merely embezzlement. It was systematic plundering that had continued for years, growing bolder with each successful diversion. A sound in the hallway froze her in place, footsteps approaching, then passing the door. Lily exhaled slowly, aware that each minute increased her risk of discovery. She needed to document what she'd found, but Victoria's laptop was undoubtedly monitored for unauthorized downloads. Using her mobile phone, Lily carefully photographed key documents and emails, paying particular attention to transaction records that matched dates in her father's notebook. One email exchange between Victoria and Oliver caught her eye. A heated disagreement about eliminating the Parker problem dated 3 days before her father's passing. The evidence assembled a damning picture. Victoria had orchestrated not only the financial fraud, but potentially her father's demise when he threatened to expose her. And Edward, despite his business acumen, remained oblivious to his wife's machinations. A notification popped up on the laptop screen. An incoming email from Oliver Harrington with the subject line, "Tonight's arrangement." Lily opened it without thinking. V. Everything in place, as discussed. The chef situation will be resolved by morning. Pembroke has agreed to the additional investment through our Cayman channel. Edward suspects nothing. Oh, the blood drained from Lily's face. The chef situation will be resolved by morning. Oliver's warning hadn't been genuine. It was part of Victoria's trap. He hadn't been helping Lily. He'd been luring her exactly where Victoria wanted her. The realization came too late. The study door swung open, revealing Victoria Blackwood, her perfect features arranged in an expression of triumphant malice. "Miss Parker," she said softly, emphasizing Lily's unmarried status. "Or should I say, Miss Parker? How kind of you to save me the trouble of summoning you." Lily stood, clutching her phone behind her back. "I can explain. I'm certain you can, Victoria interrupted, stepping into the room and closing the door. Creative storytelling appears to be a family trait. Your father was similarly imaginative in his interpretations of company finance. My father was honest, Lily retorted, anger momentarily overshadowing fear. He discovered what you've been doing and tried to stop you. Victoria's laugh was like shattering crystal. Is that the little narrative you've constructed? Poor Thomas, defender of fiscal responsibility? She moved toward the desk with predatory grace. Your father wasn't exposing fraud, my dear. He was attempting to blackmail me. That's not true, Lily whispered, though doubt crept unbidden into her mind. Her father had always been principled to a fault. No? Victoria perched on the desk's edge. Thomas discovered my arrangement with Oliver and certain financial indiscretions. Rather than reporting to Edward immediately, he approached me privately with terms, a substantial consulting fee, in exchange for his silence. Lily shook her head vehemently. I don't believe you. Belief is irrelevant. Facts remain. Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. When I refused his demand, Thomas threatened exposure. An unfortunate accident occurred before he could follow through. Horror congealed in Lily's stomach. You killed him. I did nothing of the sort, Victoria replied with affronted dignity. Thomas Parker was careless on a darkened staircase after working late. A tragic mishap. Nothing more. Then why did you hire Oliver to lure me here tonight? Lily demanded, edging toward the door. Victoria's eyebrow arched in surprise. Oliver? My dear girl, Oliver doesn't have the spine for independent action. He follows instructions, sometimes ineptly, but reliably. Confusion clouded Lily's thoughts. If Victoria hadn't orchestrated this trap, then who? The study door opened again, revealing Edward Blackwood, his expression grave. I believe I can answer that question, Lily. Victoria's composure slipped for the first time since Lily had known her. Edward? What are you doing here? The dinner is continuing splendidly without us, he finished, his gaze never leaving Lily. Oliver was acting on my instructions, not Victoria's. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. Victoria recovered first, her voice honey-sweet. Darling, this girl has broken into my private study. She's Thomas Parker's daughter, here under false pretenses with some delusional notion of corporate espionage. Edward nodded slowly. I know exactly who she is. In fact, I've known since the day she applied for the position. Shock rendered Lily momentarily speechless. You knew? Your resemblance to Thomas is striking, Edward said quietly, and your references, while cleverly constructed, couldn't withstand thorough investigation. What intrigued me was why Thomas Parker's daughter would seek employment in my household under an assumed identity. He moved further into the room, positioning himself between the two women. I decided to wait and observe. When you made that cryptic comment to Victoria yesterday, I knew you were seeking something specific. Victoria's perfect facade had begun to crack. Edward, whatever this girl has told you, she hasn't told me anything yet, he interrupted mildly. But Oliver has been quite forthcoming these past few weeks. It seems his conscience finally outweighed his fear of you. Color drained from Victoria's face. Oliver wouldn't dare. Wouldn't he? Edward's expression hardened. After Thomas's passing, I began noticing discrepancies in our financial reports. Small irregularities at first, easily dismissed as accounting errors, but they formed a pattern that became impossible to ignore. He turned to Lily. I approached Oliver with my suspicions last month. He was reluctant initially, but eventually confirmed what I feared. Victoria has been systematically embezzling from Blackwood Financial Group for years, using Oliver's expertise to conceal the transaction. Victoria's composure shattered completely. You're choosing to believe Oliver, after everything we've built together? He's been manipulating you, Edward. He and this kitchen girl, conspiring to drive us apart. No, Victoria, Edward replied with quiet finality. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the diverted funds, I've seen the evidence. What I didn't have was proof of your involvement in Thomas's death. There is no proof, because there was no involvement, Victoria hissed, her elegant features contorted with rage. Thomas Parker fell down the stairs. An accident, nothing more? Edward turned to Lily. What have you discovered tonight? Lily withdrew her phone from behind her back, her hand surprisingly steady. Emails discussing the Parker problem, dated just before my father's death. Financial records matching the codes in my father's notebook. And this, she showed them the screen displaying Oliver's most recent message. Edward read it with a deepening frown. The chef situation will be resolved by morning? He looked sharply at his wife. Victoria, what have you done? For the first time, fear flickered across Victoria's perfect features. Nothing. Oliver is being dramatic as usual. I simply plan to terminate her employment. After she conveniently suffered the same fate as her father, Edward's voice was dangerously quiet. Victoria's denial died on her lips as realization dawned in her eyes. She had lost control of the situation entirely. With unexpected swiftness, she lunged for the door, but Edward caught her arm. The police are already on their way, he said, his voice heavy with sorrow, along with forensic accountants who will examine every transaction you've authorized in the past 5 years. As Victoria's protests faded into stunned silence, Lily felt a complex mixture of emotions wash over her. Relief that her father's integrity remained untarnished, vindication that his discoveries would finally come to light, and an unexpected sadness for Edward, whose life was unraveling before her eyes. Outside, distant sirens pierced the evening calm, heralding an end to Victoria Blackwood's reign over Thornfield Manor. The truth, so long buried beneath layers of deception, was finally rising to the surface, bringing with it both justice and pain in equal measure. Chapter 4. Aftermath and Revelations. Rain streaked the windows of Thornfield Manor as Lily sat in Edward's study, cradling a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. 3 days had passed since Victoria's arrest. 3 days of police statements, financial investigations, and journalists camped at the estate gates. The elegant dinner party had dissolved into chaos with Victoria's removal from the premises, leaving Bath's high society with gossip fodder for months to come. You should get some rest, Edward advised, entering the room with weary steps. He looked older somehow, the events of recent days etched into the lines around his eyes. I could say the same to you, Lily replied. Have the police finished with their questions? Edward nodded, settling into the leather chair across from her. For now, the financial investigation will continue for months, possibly years. Victoria's schemes were remarkably complex. And Oliver? Cooperating fully in exchange for reduced charges. Edward's expression darkened. His testimony suggests Victoria may have been directly involved in your father's passing. Lily closed her eyes against the pain that welled up inside her. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her father's absence freshly raw. Will they be able to prove it? The detective inspector believes so. Oliver claims Victoria hired someone to tamper with the staircase lighting and create a hazard that would appear accidental. Edward leaned forward, his gaze intense. I want you to know, Lily, that had I suspected for one moment what Victoria was capable of, I would have protected your father. Thomas was more than an employee to me. He was a friend. The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Lily's eyes. He spoke highly of you, even when he discovered the discrepancies. He believed you were being deceived, not complicit. I was blind, Edward admitted, self-recrimination evident in his tone. So focused on expanding the business that I delegated financial oversight to Victoria and Oliver. I failed your father through my negligence. We both wanted justice, Lily said quietly. Now we have it, though not as either of us expected. Outside, a car's headlights swept across the rain-slicked driveway. Edward moved to the window, his posture tensing. The press are becoming increasingly bold. Mrs. Winters found a photographer attempting to bribe one of the gardeners yesterday. I should leave, Lily realized suddenly. My presence here is only fueling the speculation. Is that what you want? Edward turned to face her, his expression impossible to read. The question caught Lily off guard. In the single-minded pursuit of her goal, she had never considered what might come after. I haven't thought that far ahead. The truth, Edward said with a small smile, is that Thornfield Manor needs a head cook. The position remains open if you're interested. You can't be serious. Lily set down her teacup with a clatter. After I lied about my identity and qualifications? After I essentially infiltrated your home under false pretenses? Your culinary training wasn't a lie, Edward pointed out reasonably. And your motives, while unorthodox, were understandable under the circumstances. Besides, your cooking is extraordinary. Before Lily could formulate a response, a gentle knock interrupted them. James, the kitchen assistant, stood in the doorway, his expression apologetic. Begging your pardon, sir, but Detective Inspector Radcliffe has returned. He says it's urgent. Edward sighed. Show him in, please. Detective Inspector Radcliffe entered moments later, his raincoat dripping onto the antique carpet. A stocky man with shrewd eyes and a perpetually furrowed brow, he had been a constant presence at Thornfield Manor since Victoria's arrest. Mr. Blackwood, Miss Parker. He nodded to each of them in turn. Forgive the late hour, but we've had a significant development. Regarding my wife? Edward asked. Regarding Oliver Harrington. Radcliffe removed a notebook from his pocket. We executed a search warrant on his residence this afternoon and discovered something rather interesting hidden in his home safe. He produced an evidence bag containing a USB drive. This contains backup copies of every fraudulent transaction processed through Blackwood Financial Group over the past 7 years. Mr. Harrington appears to have been maintaining his own insurance policy. That hardly seems surprising, Lily commented. Oliver struck me as someone who would protect himself. Indeed. Radcliffe's gaze sharpened. What is surprising, however, is the earliest date of the recorded transactions, nearly 2 years before Victoria Blackwood became involved with the company's finances. Edward stared at the detective. That's impossible. Victoria was the architect of the fraud. Oliver admitted as much. So he claimed, Radcliffe agreed, but the evidence suggests otherwise. According to the timestamps on these files, Oliver Harrington began embezzling from your company shortly after becoming your partner. Victoria discovered his activities approximately 18 months later. And rather than exposing him, Lily realized with dawning comprehension, she joined him. Precisely, Radcliffe confirmed. Our forensic accountants have found 2 distinct patterns of financial misappropriation. Oliver's initially smaller, more cautious diversions, followed by Victoria's bolder, more sophisticated schemes. Edward sank back into his chair, visibly stunned. Oliver was the originator? All this time, I believed Victoria had corrupted him. By his own admission during today's interrogation, he brought Victoria into his plan when she discovered discrepancies similar to those your Mr. Parker later found. Radcliffe closed his notebook. He claims she threatened to expose him unless he included her. Within months, she had taken control of the entire operation, expanding it well beyond his original scope. And my father? Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Who was responsible for his accident? Radcliffe's expression softened slightly. Oliver maintains that Victoria arranged it without his knowledge. He claims he only learned of her actions after the fact. Convenient, Edward remarked bitterly. Perhaps, the detective acknowledged. But the evidence on this drive includes an email from Victoria to a third party whose identity we're still working to establish. The subject matter strongly implies arrangement of sabotage at your offices on the night in question. As Radcliffe continued detailing the evidence, Lily felt a strange sense of hollowness replace the anger that had driven her for so long. The truth, once revealed, offered less catharsis than she had imagined. Her father was still gone, his integrity questioned even in vindication by the revelation of Oliver's initial betrayal. "Miss Parker," Radcliffe said, interrupting her thoughts, "we'll need you to review these emails. There are several referencing your father that might help establish a timeline of events leading to that night." "Of course," Lily agreed numbly. After the detective departed, a heavy silence descended upon the study. Edward stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames with an expression of profound disillusionment. 7 years, he finally said. 7 years of theft and deception by the two people I trusted most in the world. Lily approached him cautiously. "You couldn't have known. Both were skilled at presenting precisely what you expected to see." "A successful businessman should be more discerning," Edward replied with self-directed anger. "I built Blackwood Financial Group from nothing, yet I failed to protect it, or the people who depended on me, from predators within my own house." "My father believed in your integrity until the end," Lily said quietly. "He told me once that a man's character isn't determined by whether he's deceived, but by what he does upon discovering the deception." Edward turned to her, something shifting in his expression. "Your father was a wise man. I see that wisdom reflected in you, Lily Parker." The use of her real name, spoken with such respect, brought unexpected warmth to Lily's cheeks. "I've made my share of mistakes. Coming here under false pretenses." "You came seeking justice for your father," Edward interrupted gently. "There's no shame in that." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Outside, the rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, a melancholy counterpoint to the turmoil within. "What happens now?" Lily asked after a moment. "To the company? To this house?" Edward's shoulders straightened, determination replacing despair in his bearing. "The company will survive. I'll repay every pound that was stolen, even if it takes years. As for Thornfield Manor," he glanced around the richly appointed room, "it feels tainted somehow. Too many lies have been spoken within these walls. Perhaps it needs new memories to replace the old," Lily suggested. "A fresh start. Perhaps." Edward's gaze returned to her face, searching. "My offer stands, you know. The position of head cook. Though I understand if you wish to move on from this place and its complicated associations." Lily considered the prospect carefully. The anger that had fueled her deception had burned away, leaving behind unexpected clarity. Despite everything that had transpired, she had found genuine fulfillment in creating meals for this household. The kitchen had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where she could honor her father's memory through work that brought joy rather than vengeance. "I would need one condition," she said finally. Edward raised an eyebrow questioningly. "No more secrets," Lily stated firmly. "Complete transparency between us going forward." A genuine smile, the first she had seen since Victoria's arrest, transformed Edward's weary features. "I believe I can manage that stipulation, Miss Parker." "Lily," she corrected him. "If we're to work together properly, you should call me Lily." "Lily," he agreed, the name sounding different somehow in his cultured voice. As the grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight, Lily realized that the day marking 1 week since her confrontation with Victoria had begun. A chapter had closed, but the story continued, different in tone and direction than she had imagined. yet somehow right in its unexpected evolution. In her father's notebook, tucked safely in her room above the garage, Thomas Parker had written a final entry that Lily had initially mistaken for financial notation. Truth finds its way to light, even through the darkest deception. Patience, courage, faith. Standing in Edward Blackwood's study as rain washed the world clean outside, Lily finally understood her father's last message. Justice had indeed found its circuitous path, not through her elaborate deception, but through the simple power of truth, finally breaking free of its constraints. Chapter 5. New Beginnings. 6 months later, spring had transformed Thornfield Manor's grounds into a riot of color. Cherry blossoms drifted like pink snow across the manicured lawns, and daffodils nodded in gentle appreciation of the warming breeze. Inside the kitchen, Lily stood at the massive center island, sleeves rolled up as she expertly crimped the edges of a lattice pie. "The deliveries from the farmer's market have arrived," James announced, pushing through the swinging door with his arms full of produce. In the months since Victoria's departure, he had blossomed from a tentative assistant into a confident sous chef under Lily's guidance. "Excellent. Put the asparagus aside for tonight's special," Lily instructed, her attention never leaving the delicate pastry work beneath her fingers. Thornfield Manor had undergone a remarkable transformation since the scandal that had rocked Bath's social circles. The initial notoriety had gradually given way to cautious curiosity as Edward implemented a bold new venture, opening the historic home's elegant dining room as a high-end restaurant 3 nights a week, with Lily as its culinary director. "Reservations are completely booked for the next month," remarked Mrs. Winters, who had mellowed considerably toward Lily since witnessing her dedication to restoring the manor's reputation. "Lord and Lady Pembroke have requested their usual table for Saturday." Lily nodded with satisfaction. "We'll prepare the pheasant terrine they enjoyed last time." The arrangement had begun as a practical solution to Edward's financial challenges. With Victoria's and Oliver's fraud exposed, Blackwood Financial Group had faced not only substantial losses, but also a crisis of confidence among investors. Rather than selling Thornfield Manor to cover the restitution payments, Edward had embraced Lily's suggestion to leverage the estate's grandeur and her culinary expertise. "Chef Parker," a young kitchen apprentice, appeared at her elbow. "Mr. Blackwood asked if you might spare a moment. He's in the greenhouse." Lily wiped her hands on her apron. "James, can you finish the crimping on this pie?" "Remember, firm but gentle pressure." The spring sunshine warmed her face as she crossed the courtyard toward the Victorian greenhouse that Edward had recently restored. Inside, the air was humid and fragrant with herbs and citrus trees. Edward stood beside a potting bench, examining a tray of seedlings with focused attention. He looked up at her approach, his face brightening. "Ah, Lily, what do you think of these heirloom tomato varieties? The gardener assures me they'll be exceptional for summer menus." Lily leaned in to inspect the tender shoots. "The black crims are particularly good for roasting, and these yellow brandywines make a stunning soup." Edward's knowledge of culinary matters had grown considerably during their collaboration. What had begun as a professional partnership to save his ancestral home had evolved into a deep friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. "I've been meaning to discuss something with you," Edward said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "The solicitors have finalized the last of Victoria's legal proceedings." Lily's expression sobered. Victoria Blackwood's trial had concluded 2 months earlier with a substantial prison sentence for financial crimes. The separate investigation into Thomas Parker's death had proven more complex, eventually resulting in additional charges, but with less definitive evidence. "Is there new information about my father's case?" Lily asked quietly. Edward shook his head. "No changes there, but Victoria has signed the divorce papers and relinquished all claims to Thornfield Manor and the company." He hesitated briefly. "There's something else. I've been considering a change to our business arrangement here. A flutter of unease passed through Lily. What sort of change? Currently, you're employed as our head chef and culinary director, Edward said, carefully transplanting a seedling to a larger pot. But given the restaurant's success and your central role in its concept and execution, I believe a partnership would be more appropriate. Lily stared at him, momentarily speechless. A partnership? 50% ownership of Thornfield Manor Restaurant, Edward clarified. Not the manor itself, of course, but the business operation you've essentially created. It seems only fair. Edward, I don't know what to say. Lily's mind raced to process this unexpected proposal. The restaurant was your idea as much as mine. Hardly, he countered with a gentle smile. I merely provided the setting. The vision, the execution, the artistic direction, those have been entirely yours. He set down his gardening tools and faced her directly. You've turned a house of deception into a place of genuine connection and community. People come here not just for extraordinary food, but for the sense of authenticity and warmth you've created. Lily felt her cheeks warm at his praise. Their professional relationship had always been characterized by mutual admiration, but something in Edward's gaze suggested deeper currents beneath the surface. There's another matter I've been meaning to discuss, he continued, his usual confidence giving way to uncharacteristic hesitation. A personal one. Before he could elaborate, Mrs. Winters appeared at the greenhouse entrance. Begging your pardon, but Detective Inspector Radcliffe has arrived. He says it's important. Edward's expression registered surprise. The investigation is closed. What could possibly? He stopped himself with visible effort. Please show him to the study. We'll be there momentarily. As Mrs. Winters departed, Lily felt a familiar apprehension coiling in her stomach. Do you think there's been a development in my father's case? Let's not speculate, Edward advised gently. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Detective Inspector Radcliffe stood examining the bookshelves when they entered the study. He turned at their arrival, his typically stern expression unreadable. Mr. Blackwood, Miss Parker, thank you for seeing me without appointment. Has something happened with Victoria's case? Edward asked directly. No, her legal matters are concluded. Radcliffe placed his briefcase on the desk and withdrew a worn leather notebook. This concerns Mr. Thomas Parker. Lily's breath caught. My father's notebook. I thought that was still in evidence. This isn't the notebook you provided us, Radcliffe clarified. This was recovered during the final search of Oliver Harrington's country house in Wiltshire. It was concealed inside a hollowed-out book in his library. He handed the notebook to Lily. We believe your father kept two separate records, one for his personal use, which you had, and this more detailed account which disappeared the night of his passing. With trembling fingers, Lily opened the familiar leather cover. Her father's neat handwriting filled the pages, documenting dates, transactions, and observations in far greater detail than the notebook she had treasured. The final entries, dated the day before his death, contained not just financial notations, but personal reflections. He knew, Lily whispered as she read. He suspected Oliver was the original architect of the fraud, not Victoria. Edward moved to her side. May I? She nodded, and they read together the final entry. Oliver's initial embezzlement began Q3 2016, predating Victoria's involvement by 18 months. Evidence suggests she discovered his activities and leveraged this knowledge to insert herself into the scheme rather than exposing him. Their partnership appears increasingly fractious. V now controls larger operation, while O maintains original smaller channels. Both continue to deceive E, who trusts them implicitly. Confronted O today with evidence, offered opportunity to approach E together with full disclosure. O initially receptive, but called later to decline. Sounded distressed. Mentioned V would stop at nothing to protect their arrangement. Will proceed alone if necessary. Meeting with E scheduled tomorrow morning. Personal note. Should anything happen to me, all evidence is compiled in second location. Elizabeth knows where. For Lily, truth above all else. Some risks worth taking for right principles. Lily's eyes blurred with tears. The mention of her mother's name, Elizabeth, connected the final pieces. Shortly after her father's passing, her mother had given Lily a key to a safety deposit box containing copies of incriminating documents, with instructions to use them only if absolutely necessary. He created a failsafe, Lily realized aloud. He anticipated the danger. Your father was more strategic than either Victoria or Oliver gave him credit for, Radcliffe observed. This notebook confirms our theory that Oliver knew of the threat to your father, but failed to warn him adequately. The detective closed his briefcase. Oliver's testimony against Victoria has been valuable, but this evidence of his prior knowledge of the danger to Thomas Parker may affect his plea agreement. I thought you should know. After Radcliffe departed, Lily sat clutching her father's recovered notebook, emotions washing over her in conflicting waves. The additional confirmation of Victoria's deliberate action against her father brought fresh pain, yet also a sense of closure. Thomas Parker had been a man of principle to the very end. He would be proud of you, Edward said quietly, breaking the contemplative silence. Not just for pursuing justice, but for how you've rebuilt something beautiful from the aftermath. Lily traced her fingers over her father's handwriting. He believed some risks were worth taking for the right principles. A philosophy you clearly share, Edward noted with admiration. Your courage in coming here, in facing Victoria, it was remarkable. Not courage so much as determination, Lily corrected softly. I couldn't bear the thought of his name and reputation being tarnished while those responsible prospered. Edward moved to the window, gazing out at the gardens where early roses were beginning to bloom along the stone walls. Before Radcliffe interrupted us in the greenhouse, I was about to raise a rather important matter. Lily looked up from the notebook, reminded of their unfinished conversation. The partnership offer? No, Edward said, turning to face her with newfound resolution. Something more personal, as I mentioned. He took a deep breath. These past months working alongside you have been transformative, Lily. Not just for Thornfield Manor or the business, but for me personally. The earnestness in his expression caused Lily's heart to quicken its pace. Edward, please, allow me to finish, he requested gently. When Victoria's deception was revealed, I thought my capacity for trust had been permanently damaged. I couldn't imagine ever risking such vulnerability again. He moved closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Yet, here you are, someone who came into my life under false pretenses, yet whose essential character is perhaps the most honest and principled I've ever encountered. The irony isn't lost on me. Despite the gravity of the moment, Lily felt a smile tugging at her lips. Life rarely follows the paths we anticipate. Indeed, Edward's own smile mirrored hers, which brings me to what I've been trying to say, rather ineptly. Lily Parker, I find myself holding you in the highest esteem and affection. In fact, I believe I've fallen in love with you. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, transforming the study's atmosphere. Lily sat perfectly still, her father's notebook warm in her hands as she processed Edward's words. I realize this may seem sudden, Edward continued when she remained silent, and I understand completely if you don't share these feelings. Our professional relationship would continue unchanged, of course. Lily finally found her voice. It doesn't feel sudden at all, she admitted quietly. It feels like the natural conclusion to a story that began the moment I walked through Thornfield Manor's doors. She rose from her chair, closing the distance between them. When I came here seeking justice for my father, I never imagined finding healing as well, or happiness. Her eyes met his with newfound clarity. Or love. Edward's expression transformed with hopeful understanding. Are you saying that I love you too? Lily finished for him. Yes, Edward. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, I do. As spring sunshine streamed through the study windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like golden confetti around them, Edward took Lily's hands in his. The touch was both a culmination and a beginning, an acknowledgement of the painful path that had brought them together and a promise of the future they would build from those broken pieces. Outside, Thornfield Manor's gardens continued their steady renewal, winter's barren branches giving way to fresh green growth and vibrant blossoms. Inside, two people who had navigated deception and loss found in each other the most unexpected reward of all, a second chance at trust, purpose, and love. Truth, as Thomas Parker had believed, had indeed found its way to light. And in that illumination, something far more precious than justice had been discovered.